When you picture the Vikings, what do you see? A mighty northern empire united under one fierce ruler, long ships cutting through icy waters, warriors marching together under the same flag. Well, that's the picture Hollywood painted. But here's the truth. The Vikings were never one united empire. In fact, they spent as much time fighting each other as they did raiding anyone else. Today on the History Mythbuster, we're breaking down one of the biggest misconceptions in Norse history, the myth of the Viking Empire. So where did this idea come from? Much of it traces back to the 19th and 20th centuries, when nationalism was on the rise across Europe. Writers and historians wanted epic, heroic tales of their ancestors. And so, the image of a mighty Viking nation, one people, one king, one destiny, was born. But that's pure myth-making. In reality, during the Viking Age, roughly 793 to 1066 CE, Scandinavia wasn't a single country. It was a patchwork of rival clans, chieftains, and petty kingdoms scattered across what we now call Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. Each region had its own customs, dialects, and power struggles. There was no Viking capital, no Viking flag, and definitely no Viking emperor. Here's another important detail. Viking wasn't even a nationality. It was a job description. The Old Norse word vikingur meant sea raider, or one who goes on an expedition. Going a Viking was something people did, not who they were. A farmer in Norway could spend part of the year tending crops, then sail off to raid or trade, and return home to his local community. So when we say Vikings, we're not talking about one ethnic or political group. We're talking about thousands of individuals from dozens of rival regions, each with their own loyalties and leaders. This distinction matters because it shows how fluid Viking society was, more like a network than a nation. Let's zoom in on the Scandinavian map around the 9th and 10th centuries. In Denmark, small kingdoms like Jutland, Zealand, and Scania constantly jockeyed for power. In Norway, mountainous terrain isolated communities, so local warlords or jarls ruled small territories. In Sweden, power was split among inland chieftains and coastal traders, especially around Uppland and Gotland. All of these groups shared a similar culture and religion, but they weren't politically united. Imagine three cousins who all share a family name, but they're constantly competing for inheritance and land. That was Viking Scandinavia. And yes, they raided and traded abroad, but they also raided each other. Feuds between neighboring jarls could last for generations. Some of the bloodiest Viking battles didn't happen in England or France. They happened right in their own fjords. Now, there were ambitious rulers who tried to unite the North, but they never truly built a lasting Viking empire. Take Harald Fairhair of Norway. Legend says he vowed not to cut his hair until he conquered all of Norway, and by the late 800s he supposedly did. But even then, united Norway meant loose alliances, not centralized control. Local chieftains still ruled their own territories and rebelled often. Then there was King Cnut the Great, who ruled over Denmark, Norway, and England in the early 11th century. That sounds like an empire, right? Not quite. Cnut's realm was a personal union, held together by his own power, not by shared identity. When he died, it fell apart almost immediately. So while there were moments of unity, they were fleeting, more like waves than solid land. So if the evidence is so clear, why do people still imagine a unified Viking empire? Two big reasons. First, romanticism and pop culture. Stories need heroes, and an empire under one great Viking king makes a cleaner, grander story than messy regional feuds. From opera to video games, a single Viking nation looks epic on screen. Second, national pride. In the 1800s and early 1900s, as Denmark, Norway, and Sweden were building national identities, writers reimagined Vikings as their glorious common ancestors. It helped shape a proud origin story, even if it wasn't historically accurate. But as historians dig deeper, through sagas, runestones, and archaeology, the truth is far more interesting than the myth. Because instead of one empire, what we find is a web of cultures, fiercely independent, yet connected through trade, exploration, and legend. The Vikings' power didn't come from unity, it came from adaptability. Their lack of central control made them unpredictable, quick to seize opportunity anywhere from Iceland to Baghdad. They didn't need an emperor because their strength was in their flexibility, in the courage of small groups who could act fast, travel light, and forge new paths across continents. They were pioneers, not pawns of a single ruler. And that decentralized nature might just be what made them so successful for so long. So, the next time someone says the Viking Empire, you'll know it never existed. There was no single Viking king, no united army, just countless independent warriors, explorers, and dreamers whose stories became one legend. And maybe that's the real lesson. Sometimes history isn't about unity. It's about individuality, resilience, and the power of many voices shaping one unforgettable age. I'm Hope, and this has been the History Mythbuster. If you enjoyed busting this myth, hit subscribe and stay tuned for the next deep dive into history's biggest misconceptions.